Welcome to Post Whatever with Ken Nishikawa. I cover everything and nothing. In other words, I'd post whatever. And today, I'll be examining the mysterious and seemingly inexplicable John Yoko Phenomenon. When you walk down the streets of Shibukitazawa, Koenji, or any of the funkier corners of Tokyo, you cannot help but witness a great many international and or interracial couples in love, which makes you think that the world is slowly but surely becoming one. The vision of Arcadia, the eternal peace of mankind, just around the corner. Whilst the eternal peace of mankind is a mildly curious topic, it is also a lengthy one, and frankly, judging from what's currently going on in the world, not many of us seem especially bothered about peace at the moment. So, in the interest of clever marketing and the possibility of great attraction, I shall perish the thought. When you observe these international interracial couples between Westerners and Japanese, you quickly notice that a disproportionate number consists of a Western male and a Japanese female. And whilst reverse combination is on the rise in recent years, it is safe to say that the dominant pairing remains stubbornly and persistently John and Yoko. I believe there are three reasons behind this phenomenon: cultural, racist, and, dare I say, biological. And before I voluntarily march into the particular minefield of race, I would like to make it crystal clear that I am entirely in favour of mixed couples in any shape or form. Well, with that out of the way, let us dive into the genesis, the first Western and Japanese couple in recorded history. Well, sadly, it comes as no surprise. The couple in question consists of one William Adams, also known as Miura Anjin, and his Japanese wife Oyuki. Although greatly lacking in historical accuracy, the novel and television series Shogun is loosely based on this couple, which will give you a rough idea of events, provided you watch it with a healthy disregard for facts. The original Anjin-san arrived in Japan in 1600 after a voyage so disastrous it makes modern budget airline look positively luxurious. The Japanese authorities took one look at him and said, well, yeah, let's arrest that barbarian immediately, which, by the standards of the day, was essentially a welcome reception. Now, while Adams was busy being imprisoned for the crime of turning up, he somehow managed to impress Ieyasu Tokugawa, the shogun, by explaining geometry without once bursting into tears. He's a very lucky man. Ieyasu, clearly someone who enjoyed collecting unusual foreigners the way others collect unusual foreign teapots, rewarded Adams with land, a house, the title of samurai, and, eventually, a wife. This made Adams the first Englishman, or European for that matter, in history to be paid for doing mathematics, and managed to keep his head from departing his shoulders. But the real star of this story is Oyuki, the Japanese woman who actually married him. Imagine, if you will, being introduced to a man who speaks zero Japanese, possessed no money, no position, and whose job title is a navigator, which is already something of a bad omen, I think. And given that he has just navigated himself directly into a Japanese prison as soon as he arrived. And yet, Oyuki said yes. Historians remain unsure why. Well, theories include she admired his courage, she admired his bushy beard, or she simply lost a bet, or her mind, or possibly both. Whatever the truth, together they built a life. Adams constructed ships for Shogun. Oyuki kept the household running. And both of them navigated the cultural complexities of the very first mixed marriage in the 17th century Japan without, one presumes, the benefit of marriage guidance, or a therapist. And yes, before you ask, William Adams and Oyuki did have children, 2 of them in fact, a son, Joseph, and a daughter, Susanna, very Japanese names. Both grew up in Japan and became perfectly respectable members of society. Their descendants carried on for generations, actually. And also that means that somewhere in Japan today, there are people who can legitimately say, oh yes, my ancestor was an English samurai. One's ancestor cannot get much cooler than that, I think. So that's the brief history of the first Western Japanese couple in recorded history. And the list continues right up to the most recent addition, Nicolas Cage and his Japanese wife Riko Shibata. And although there are certainly cases where the husband is Japanese and the wife Western, Inazo Nitobe, the former frontman of the 5,000 yen note, and his wife Mary, an American Quaker, springs to mind. The overwhelming majority of these pairings remain John and Yoko. Did you know that one of the earliest male sex symbols in Hollywood was Japanese? If you did, you're a true cinephile and I salute you. The man in question is Sesshu Hayakawa. Hayakawa was born in Japan in 1886 and migrated to the States in 1907. In 1915, he starred in a film called The Cheat, a film so scandalous for its time that audiences practically required smelling salts. It featured what is widely considered the first on-screen interracial kiss, Hayakawa and actress Fanny Ward, which in 1915 was like detonating a small cultural atomic bomb. The film was a massive hit, largely because Hayakawa radiated a sort of dangerous elegance that made American women swoon and studio executives panic. Critics compared him to Rudolph Valentine, although Valentine, I think, became famous after Hayakawa, but except with more menace, clearly, the yellow peril and all that, and better cheekbones. One historian even noted that women were obsessed with him. American, predominantly white women. Hollywood, naturally, responded to this enthusiasm. It's the only way Hollywood knows how, by banning it. Long before the Hay Code officially outlawed interracial romance on screen in 1930, studios quietly decided that the sight of white women falling for men of color was simply too, shall we say, stimulating for the public good. And so Hayakawa was slowly phased out, to the considerable amusement, one imagines, of Valentino, who promptly filled the void without anyone troubling him about his cheekbones. And by the time the production code arrived, the rule was explicit. No interracial romance on screen. Full stop. No argument. No exceptions. And this taboo persisted for decades, well into the 1950s and, in practice, the 1960s. I struggle to recall a single mainstream film in which a white woman falls in love with a non-white man before roughly the year 2000, with the possible exception of The English Patient, and even that was touch and go, really. However, when it comes to portraying a romance between a white male and a Japanese female, things were slightly different. Madame Butterfly naturally springs to mind, and there follows a tiresomely long list of films, including the 1957 picture Sayonara, starring Marlon Brando and Miko Taka. The following years, The Barbarian and the Geisha, starring an actor not especially renowned for his progressive racial attitudes and views, John Wayne, alongside Eiko Ando. And, of course, the Bond franchise, which decades before Halle Berry was introduced as a rare non-white Bond girl, gave us the 1967 You Only Live Twice, in which Sean Connery romances not one but two beautiful Japanese actresses, Akiko Wakabayashi and Mie Hama. One reason this particular combination was more well, shall we say, tolerated, the white male and Japanese or maybe like Far East and Asian female by polite society relates to a rather charming double standard, the habit of declaring that if you're a quarter African, you're defined as black. But if you're a quarter, or in some cases even half Japanese, you are basically white and may be admitted to respectable white society, or at least as an honorary white. This kind of relates to the biological reason why white male, Japanese female combination is considered more passable to some, and brings me to the dangerous sphere of biology. As some of you may know, a lion and a tiger can crossbreed. The offspring, however, are called different things, depending on, again, the combination. If the father is a lion and the mother is a tiger, the cub is called a liger. Whereas if the father is a tiger and the mother is a lion, the cub is a tigon. Why? Well, apparently the liger resembles the lion more closely, whilst the tigon leans tiger. In other words, cubs tend to inherit the father's features more strongly than the mother's. I mention this not because I'm comparing anyone to large cats. I wish to be perfectly clear about that. But because it does, in a roundabout fashion, illuminate certain biological instincts around pairing that transcend mere culture and, kind of underlining racism behind it. Save for people of sub-Saharan African origin, we all carry a small quantity of Neanderthal DNA. Yes, even some of our most ancient ancestors had a weak spot for someone who looked exotic. Evolution is, at its core, a very long story about not being able to help yourself. Or, as Oscar Wilde put it, the only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. A study published in Science, yes, the magazine Science, so we're talking proper lab coats, peer review, the full catastrophe, confirmed that when Neanderthals and Homo sapiens got together, it was predominantly Neanderthal men and Homo sapiens women, not the other way around. The evidence comes from the depletion of Neanderthal DNA on the X chromosome, which suggests the gene flow was heavily male-biased. Neanderthal fathers, modern human mothers. Now, I would like you to sit with that for a moment, because humanity, all of it, every Nobel laureate, every moral philosopher, every person who has ever gazed up at the stars and felt something ineffable is, in some small part, the product of Neanderthal bloke successfully chatting up a Homo sapiens woman approximately 47,000 years ago, during what researchers describe as a sustained period of interbreeding lasting roughly 7,000 years. Now, 7,000 years, that is longer than recorded history. Someone was obviously extremely persistent. Now, Neanderthals were considerably more robustly built than Homo sapiens. Broader, heavier, more physically imposing, possibly more body hair and everything. And as Western people tend, on average, to be taller and larger in frame than the Japanese average people, one might tempted to draw a line from ancient physical attraction all the way to modern Tokyo. However, this hypothesis has a fatal flaw, and here's where this particular theory collapses rather magnificently under its own weight. The Japanese, or the East Asians at large, carry between 8 and 24% more Neanderthal DNA than people of European ancestry, by a meaningful margin. Which means that if physical Neanderthal heritage is anyone's romantic calling card, it belongs rather more convincingly to the Japanese women than to the Western man. What I will say, because I do try occasionally to be honest, is that the real explanation is almost certainly more tedious than 47,000-year-old evolutionary memory. It probably has more to do with soft power, with the specific image of Western masculinity that arrived in Japan in the late 19th century, around the beginning of Meiji era, followed by Hollywood, music, pop culture, and so on. The Neanderthal didn't have a film industry. He couldn't even release an album, whereas John Lennon could do both. Righto, that's probably quite enough of that subject. This one turned out to be longer than I had anticipated. And I hope I have at least sparked some inner debate. Or failing that, maybe mild bewilderment. But, at the end of the day, perhaps it really is just down to the fact, or at least cultural tendencies, that Japanese girls are just not very good at saying no. Or the boys from the West are not very good at taking no for an answer. Oh, a bit of both. Or, in this day and age, vice versa. Who knows? So that's whatsoever. So that's post whatever for this week. Thank you very much for listening to this rather lengthy episode. And if you found any of that remotely useful or even mildly diverting, do consider liking and subscribing. I'm told it's terribly important. The survival of this show hinges on the algorithm, you see. So until next time, I'm Ken Nishikawa, and whether you carry a little Neanderthal or a great deal of it, or none at all, peace and love.